Well, it's a bright day. It's Monday, the 13th of November, and I continue reading chapter 1 of the second part of Return to Elysium. It is a Joan Grant far memory book, her incarnation as Lucina in the 2nd century BC in Greece. She has now, though, just arrived in Rome. She is, I think, 17 or 18 now, and she has travelled with Narcissus and Epicurus, I think. The expression in the woman's eyes as she looked at the decurion gave me a warm sympathy for her. Why did I feel she was the only person here who had a claim on my affection? She was in love with him, blindly, agonizingly in love, and trying to conceal it so that she would be able to be gay and hard as he expected. Perhaps she knew how little she meant to him, or was he going away to a foreign country where he would soon forget she had ever sat with him among a crowd which for her had no existence? Her hair was a brilliant yellow, and the dark roots betrayed the dye. Only her eyes were really young, blue eyes with long lashes. The structure of her face would have pleased Praxiteles, who had often told me that no woman need fear age who has beauty deep in her bones. She leaned forward, speaking urgently, and put her hand on the man's arm. He shook her off, and she began to cry. The tears made streaks in the paint. He spoke to her in a low voice. I could not hear the words, only the tone, which told me he was querulously angry. It pleased him to be desired. It embarrassed him to be seen in the company of a weeping woman. Discretion suddenly seemed supremely unimportant. I got up from the table and walked across the crowded room. Everyone stopped talking to stare at me. In the abrupt silence I heard my voice, a gay, trivial voice which Euripides had taught me to use for certain roles. How delightful and surprising to see you here. Last time we met was in Athens at a banquet for the winners of the games. I agree with you that one never really knows a foreign city until one has been to the taverns to watch the plebeians. So quaint, so remarkable to learn that they are also hungry and require to be amused. The decurion, who had been leaning on the table, got quickly to his feet, his sword clattering against the bronze greaves. "Perhaps your friend would like to join us," he said, then added under his breath, which stank of wine, "Why didn't you tell me you had been to Athens?" The woman looked at me intently and said, "I thought that she might have forgotten Helena. It is 3 years since we met." "Lucina could never forget Helena," I said. "My dear, Narcissus will be delighted to see you again. He has talked of you so much that if I were not a docile wife, I should have been abjectly jealous." The decurion stooped to pick up his helmet and lurched against the table, nearly overturning it. Good. He was already in wine, which made him an opponent more than half disarmed. The woman stared at me. Plainly as though she had spoken aloud, her eyes said, "Why are you doing this for me?" I smiled to her, "Because I'm also a woman, and we must join together against the men who make a mock of us." Narcissus had come quietly up behind me and overheard most of the exchange. He could not have played his role better if Euripides had rehearsed us. He not only accepted me as his wife, but endowed us with 3 children, the eldest a son of 8, who seemed to be appallingly precocious. He invented a family richly studded with illustrious names, aunts, cousins, even a grandfather who had been a general, and an uncle whose oratory had been the pride of Athens. Helena became the 3rd daughter of my youngest uncle, who had married a patrician of a small town in the southern province of Rome, a marriage which the family, by the time Narcissus had finished with the family, it deserved deep carving in marble, rather than the small nobility of a mere capital letter, had considered a deplorable clot in the stream of noble blood. We piled the decurion with the best wine the tavern could offer. If Epicurus complained that we had thoughtlessly squandered our resources, he could blame his own lack of consideration in leaving us to pass what had promised to be an uneventful evening. I learned that the man's name was Aulus, and that he expected to be transferred to one of the northern outposts in the immediate future. I thought it best to assume that he had been trying to persuade Helena to accompany him, and that marriage was the least he could offer to a woman who was so much better born than himself. Helena, I said, as though reluctant to introduce a chill note of reality into a friendly conversation. I know how difficult it is to be worldly when one is young and in love. But have you considered how difficult it will be for you to live in a small circle, which is all that can be permitted to the wife of a decurion? I stared pointedly at his helmet. And only a decurion of a foreign legion? I don't want to stress the gulf which divides you socially, but no fish had ever risen with such alacrity. He began to protest that as a soldier and a citizen of Rome, he had no cause to fear anyone. He even enumerated the tribute he had managed to exact by reason of his office. It was easy to see that, to her, this represented extraordinary wealth. To me, it made little sense, for I had not yet learned the currency in which he boasted. He lurched uncertainly to his feet and raised his wine cup in a toast. I drink to Helena and to her friends. I'm only a decurion, but I shall soon win promotion. The only affected him so profoundly that I thought he was going to indulge in maudlin tears. I'm only a decurion, but I will not betray my wife. If Helena will consent to be my wife, of such an obscure man as myself. He swayed, clutching at the table for support. Will you be my wife, Helena? Yes, she said, I will be your wife. Her voice was thick as felted wool, but he said, almost as though he were giving a battle order, you will have to marry me tonight. Tonight, do you understand? If you are going to marry a common soldier, you mustn't expect him to be sneered at by your rich relations. You marry me tonight or I go away. I'm not going to be anyone's fool. She took his hand and drew him down on the bench beside her. I will marry you tonight. Nobody shall have the chance to spoil things for us. He was so moved by this token of patrician generosity that he wept, a sign that we could leave them all together to find their happiness, such as it was. The woman came to the door with me. I shall never forget Lucina, she said. I will make him a good wife. I love him, and I thought I was never going to see him again. I took the 4 gold staters which Epicurus had given Narcissus to look after and slipped them into her hand. Will you buy yourself a wedding gift from your cousins? Thank you, she said. I can only say thank you. Epicurus was waiting for us outside our inn. You are late, he said abruptly. I got back nearly an hour ago. I have found a suitable villa into which we can move together tomorrow. Then, as we did not appear suitably excited, he added, I'm afraid you have had a very boring evening. Not boring, said Narcissus fervently. An evening with Lucina is never likely to be dull. No doubt in time we shall wish that it could be. Expensive, exhausting, a serious strain on the wits, but never, I assure you, drab or commonplace. It can't have been expensive, objected Epicurus. I asked the prices before I left, and they were exceedingly moderate. Never be overconfident that Lucina will be restrained by the modesty of a tariff, and then perhaps you will spare yourself the need of recasting your tallies. Narcissus was laughing as he climbed the ladder which led to our room, so I laughed with him instead of waiting to explain that I had enjoyed playing Apollo, even though I could not play the role for Lucina. I was wakened next morning by the sound of excited conversation coming up through the floor, of worm-eaten boards. I leaned out of the small window and saw 3 litters, each with 2 bearers in the street below. My battery. In the street below. They obviously belonged to a patrician, and my surprise at seeing them in such a poor part of the city was obviously shared by a crowd of urchins. Epicurus came past the ragged curtain which divided their room from mine. You had better hurry, Lucina, the litters are waiting for us. For us? I told you last night that I had obtained a suitable villa. You and Narcissus were too occupied with your exploit to inquire what I had been doing on your behalf. I'm sorry, I said contritely. It was horrid of me. I didn't mean to be unkind, and I'm very grateful for everything. His face softened. It was stupid of me to be offended. I thought you were going to be excited, so when you seemed indifferent, I sulked. But of course I am excited. How did you get the litters? How did you manage everything so quickly? I went to see a merchant I used to know in Athens. He told me that a certain patrician had recently been banished to the provinces, a matter of unpaid gambling debts. I have purchased the right to live in his villa, with all the amenities, including 6 slaves for a year. Within a year we should be in a position to make permanent arrangements. But you said we should have to live very quietly at first. You suggested we might find lodgings with a merchant. How can we afford to start with a house and slaves of our own? He hesitated and then said abruptly, I decided that the plan required modification. It was agreed that the arrangement should be left to me, and you can question the details when I prove myself inadequate. He went out of the room, obviously to avoid further conversation. I heard him go down the ladder and speak to Narcissus. How had he managed to pay for a house and slaves? Pay for a year? I slipped into the other room. None of the chests were missing. I lifted the small leather sack in which our money was kept. It was apparently no lighter than it had been after he lost so much at dice. So he had not paid in coin. The chests were still corded, so they had not sold any of the things we had brought with us. Yet surely something was missing. Then I realized it was a small package, wrapped in cloth and heavily sealed, which Epicurus guarded with more care than the money. I asked him what it contained, but he had always avoided the question. It had been very heavy. Gold is heavy, but it was not coin, for I had felt it. What did Epicurus have which made of gold, and yet could not be shown even to me? It was puzzling, but I decided to be less inquisitive until a more propitious moment. The innkeeper bowed so low that I thought he was going to fall on his face. The slattern, who had refused to bring me clean washing water the night before, was servile, her single eye rapturous as she counted the bronze coins which Epicurus had dropped into her dirty hand. I learned something important about Rome. People were not judged by their character, not even by their behavior, but by their power to command money or slaves. We travelled smoothly through the wide streets. I saw many litters with curtains more richly decorated than our own. A cohort of soldiers marched with a blare of sunlight on polished helmets. A chariot overtook us, and the people who thronged the square scattered to avoid the horse. A pack donkey, brayed in fear, trying to escape into a narrow alley, slipped on the cobbles and fell. One of the packs burst open. A shower of trinkets rolled into a gutter choked with refuse. The donkey boy tried to gather them up, cursing the urchins who fought each other for this unexpected prey. The donkey screamed with the pain of its broken leg. No one paid any attention. I learned something more of the Romans. They were indifferent to pain if it did not directly concern them. I would not forget the donkey. Rome should pay in its own coin for an agony I considered trivial, but which made me want to retch. The buildings might have impressed the stranger who had not the wit to look at the faces of the people. Both were too gross and too concerned with the symbols of material power. Even the pediments were like heavy eyebrows which tried to conceal a defect of vision. The columns were strong, but with the strength of the gladiator rather than the subtleness of the athlete. As Cleopas had told me, that a victory won through fear is only a defeat. But the Roman had declared the weapons of their challenge. If they wished to use coin and fear, I might have to accept their terms and win because I was strong enough not to be bound by their symbols. Our villa was on one of the hills overlooking the main city. We entered through a courtyard flanked by the servants' quarters and the stables. A pair of massive doors led into the main hall, higher than the rest of the house and lit by clerestory windows. To the right were 4 bedrooms, comfortable but ornate. To the left, a large living room with 3 arches opening on a terrace. Part of the terrace was covered by a pergola. In summer, it would be pleasantly shaded by vines which now were black, twisted shapes that still held a few withered grapes. 2 opulent females in white marble stared bleakly at each other across a shallow flight of steps that led down to a small formal garden. The beds were freshly dug. The rose bushes still displayed a few wizened flowers. A clematis tried to retain the memory of purple in the white beards of ancients. In a pool slimy with rotting lily leaves, a robust nerate supported a conch shell. There are few things more dead than a silent fountain. It is done, this chapter. Next one is Temple of the Tiber.